my concept of food justice is that everyone should have access to safe, affordable, and culturally desirable foods. And so this is a way to have that access. Is your question?
Oh, and you said you can't use like a metal lid from a pickle jar, let's say? You put plastic in between it and screw the lid down?
When, well, we usually get jars, oh, okay, beet juice. Well, good excuse.
Those are the official
Those are
ones,
mason jars,
yeah.
but you can actually recycle other jars. Is that what you do?
Yeah, so maybe I shouldn't use this example, but usually, like most jars, like these are reused jars that aren't mason jars.
Right.
The bottoms of them are this kind of plastic. And
what if they're not, though? Because I buy those marinated artichoke hearts, and they're really nice jars at Costco. And I hate to throw them away, but they have a metal lid that's painted, and if you scratch it, it'll rust. And I put a sheet of plastic down before I screw the lid down.
well, also since what you can also do is not have it go all the way to the top, which is best anyways.
Yeah, but you move them, and you're going to slosh it around.
Right, and if it has that sort of instantaneous contact, it's not that big of a deal.
Oh, it's just if it floats in it, that's what
Great.
ruins it.
Well, now I have an excuse to eat these beets. They're not submerged anymore. Okay, so with kimchi, so some of you have a handful in front of you, and all you need to do is really break it down by squeezing it. So you have a whole workshop to massage your cabbage, and the reason why you want to squeeze it is so that you're breaking down the cell walls. And that gets the juices out. And with these, like with kimchi or other fermenting foods, like you want things to be in its own juice instead of putting water in. I justify it by saying that I live in San Diego and we're in a drought, so really like that can make a difference. But really, it also goes back to taste because you're diluting it with water. So you want the nutrients from the cabbage to kind of excite and catalyze the process of breaking down the cell walls. You can also add salt. So salt, as you know, like tends to expel liquids. So that helps. I try not to use too much salt, otherwise it affects the fermentation process, because the salt will kill the bacteria that is beneficial to fermentation. Kimchi is really kind of dynamic, like you can kind of use other ingredients other than cabbage. You can use, well, there's napa cabbage, you can use chard as well. And you can put in carrots. I tend to put in carrots, ginger, garlic, Thai chilies, some green onions, and it's also an opportunity for me to make my jars look pretty. Like I tend to like put slices of the oranges along the side as little darts and things like that. You can also add spices such as curry powder or coriander. A more simplified version of kimchi that is more popular in Western Europe is sauerkraut. They're pretty much the same process, but you might put dill or fennel in that instead.
Do you think the Germans do that? Do they squeeze their sauerkraut? They do? Wow.
Yeah, my friend is currently living in Germany, and yeah, we went to a sauerkraut making workshop, and he was like, "Yeah, my hand is really tired now." But it's kind of a great way to build up, hand strength. Really. And in terms of getting the bacterial culture to start up the fermentation, you don't have to buy anything. It's floating around in the air, and so when you put it in the jar, it's already in there. You can kickstart it by using a previous batch of something that you fermented. So sometimes I keep the juice of another batch so that things develop a lot faster. You can also use yogurt culture. So sometimes I'll just take something.
So it's like a starter.
It's like a starter. And this is also something you can share with friends, like sharing cultures.
That's cool.
You might have a batch that you really liked, Sometimes I fail and make something that is not as happy. And so I'll keep the one that I really liked and transfer it to the next one. And that's kind of how sourdough cultures are continued. And I know in like Sweden, they have this sourdough culture that you just pass among friends, and you sit together and like you roll the dough with the culture in it and pass it on. There are some questions back there.
Isn't cabbage naturally high in lactobacillus?
Which is what we want for fermentation. So there are also concerns about bad bacteria, right? Like so foodborne illnesses coming from bacteria. And of the billions of kind of strains of bacteria, there are only really 20 that make us sick through food. And then 90% of like food-related and foodborne illnesses in the U.S. Come from about like 10 different strains, and that includes staph, botulism, E. coli 0157007, and then others. But of those that are kind of the main perpetrators of foodborne illnesses, I guess most of them are actually from animal sources. So when we think of E. coli, some people think of the spinach scare that happened a few years ago, but that was because it was downstream of a cattle ranch where the cattle had E. coli, and it was going, their feces were going into the water source that was irrigating the spinach. The one that is important to consider is botulism. And that can be avoided by sterilizing jars, having high acid environments, so this kimchi is a high acid environment, and also making sure that you just don't have air bubbles. And when fermenting, of course, there's going to be some air because those microbes are respirating, and what you can do is just take a chopstick and just kind of go along the sides of the jars and let the bubbles filter up. Do you have a question?
More of a comment. I just wanted to say I have this book called Mild Fermentation, and it's a really good book, and I just want to tell everybody they should check it out if they want to get into fermentation.
Yeah. The author's name is, his last name is Sauer, and he just calls himself Sauerkraut. He's a really great speaker, too. So how far along are people with the cabbage?
This
It's
is
a
good.
little bruised.
That's good, that's good.
So how long do you normally do it? Massage it, like?
It depends on if I'm distracting myself with other things, but
How should it look? Like soft?
You want it
pliable?
to be transparent. And then what you eventually end up doing is, I'm going to give away all of my jars. So you press them into the jars and you get the juices out so that they're submerged. So I'm going to kind of pass around our salt, so in case you want to salt yours a little bit. And then I'm going to cut up the green onions, Thai chilies, garlic, ginger, and carrots. If any of you want to come up and grab some, you're welcome to do so. I'll just leave them in the corner. But now I'll just let my mom go on.
Does this much have sugar in it? Has a bit of sweetness, or is that just what happens with the fermentation?
My mom put some sugar in it.
Okay.
Any other questions about this kimchi process?
Do you always use iodized salt?
I prefer iodized salt,
Okay.
but you don't
As
have
opposed to kosher, salt, you know.
Yeah, not all salt has been iodized, but so in the sort of more extreme cases that my mom was talking about, like you really want iodine because that's really good for your thyroid and for your immune system.
I just heard that it affects the bacteria culture. Some of them don't like iodine, so that's just what I heard. I was just wondering.
I usually put in a really nominal amount. So I think, yeah, if you were doing like a brine solution, then yeah, but also you don't want fermentation in this process. So it's okay to use the iodized salt. Any other questions about the kimchi?
Well, so is there like a rule of thumb for the amount of salt? Because I do kraut and I just do salt to taste. But I've seen like certain people say like you want to do like 2 tablespoons per